So I am Iping. I'm your host for this lovely, sunny, hot afternoon in Manila, but also cloudy, kind of raining, drizzling day here in Taipei. We're very happy that we are now in end of April, and we are now proudly into the third session of our Critical Islands pre-conference virtual Zoom forums today. And today, thank you again for your continuous support and participation. It is my big pleasure and a wonderful um, job to give a little bit introduction to our speaker today. I bumped into Raymond, when we all went to Indonesia, right, last October in our 2022 Critical Island Studies Conference. Yeah, I think that's where we first met, and and knowing where I come from, from Taipei, Taiwan, and interested in Southeast Asian literature and in the work of Nick Joaquin, especially. I think I remember that we had a conversation about Joaquin, and today, very, very, much appreciated that Raymond is going to talk to us about Joaquin. Before he starts, I'd like to give you folks a little bit introduction about Raymond. Raymon Ritumbán is now an instructor at the Department of English, Ateneo de Manila Universities in the Philippines, where he earned his Master of Arts in Literary and Culture Studies. He also teaches core courses in English and American literature and an elective course in modern Korean fiction. So Raymond is also teaching Korean literature. Raymond specializes in memory and trauma studies and does research on Philippine literature, especially on the works of Nick Joaquin, and also contemporary Korean literature and media. Yeah, he also does research on contemporary Korean literature and media. In addition, Raymond also heads the communication and events section for, this most important and the trend-setting AHCI journal, Critica Cultura. So this is also what he does at his current position at Ateneo. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me present to you Raymond Ritumbán. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you, Iping, Professor Iping. Right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Raymon Ritumbán of the Ateneo, and I thank you for your interest in my talk in the same way that I thank the 2023 Critical Island Studies in Southeast Asia Zoom Forum, especially Professor Liang Iping of National Taiwan Normal University, for inviting me to speak this afternoon about the Filipino writer Nick Joaquin, his masterpiece, The Woman Who Had Two Navels, and of course, Hong Kong, which figures as a liminal space in Joaquin's life in two navels and in Philippine history and contemporary mobility. So I'd like to start with an introduction of Nick Joaquin. This introduction is composed of pertinent biographical details coupled with historical notes and select commendations for his works, as well as criticisms. Here I also intend to describe Hong Kong as a formative place for Joaquin. Right. So Nick Joaquin was born in 1917 in Paco, Manila, Philippines. At that time, the country was under American occupation, which began in 1898 and lasted until 1946. So Nick was raised in an upper middle class household with proper connections, which had a strong affinity for their Spanish Filipino heritage and was also a devout Catholic, which was characteristic of their social class. So his father, Don Leocadio Joaquin, was a veteran of the 1896 revolution. His mother was a public school teacher who taught Spanish and English to grade school students. And Nick grew up a voracious reader thanks to the home library of his father and the card that he gave him for the National Library. He was also fluent in Castilian Spanish, courtesy of his mother, who ensured that her children would not lose the language of their fathers, and of course, English, which was the official language of the country at the time. He also developed a lasting devotion to the Blessed Virgin and attended the Holy Mass regularly. So what you see on the screen now, to give you an idea of the world that Nick Joaquin grew up to, there's the capture of General Aguinaldo. There's the Thomas sites teaching Filipino students. That's Paco Market below. And that's Santo Domingo Church in Intramuros, which he frequented when he was young. But Nick's life and his family's life changed when his father died of a massive stroke in the late 1920s. So this resulted in a change of lifestyle. Nick and his brothers moved in with their eldest brother, Porfirio, a jazz musician who was married to Sarah Cabigtin, a teacher of drama at a university in the Philippines. Sarah, in fact, was the one who prodded the teenage Nick to submit his first poem for publication. And Sarah would continue to do so in the years to come. In time, Nick would be lauded by a senior poet of the period, Jose Garcia Villa, calling him as the only Filipino writer with real imagination and who reveals behind his writings a genuine first-rate mind. So that's Jose Garcia Villa on the picture. Nick continued writing his precursory pieces in the 1930s, and during this period, he was employed as a staff for a periodical on Tribune, Vanguardia, and Taliba. In terms of Philippine history, it was also a time of transition. In 1935, the country became a commonwealth, which was a step towards full independence from the US. So this transition to full independence was interrupted when Imperial Japan invaded and occupied the country during the final stretch of the Second World War. So the war left Manila, specifically Intramuros, the noble and ever loyal city, a premier bastion of Spanish Filipino heritage at that time, and Nick's own beloved city, devastated. And before the ruins, his nephew heard him saying, lamenting inconsolably, I shall go away from this place and never come back. So that came true a year after, right? In 1946, Nick's essay, La Naval de Manila, where he narrated the triumph of the Spanish-Filipino Armada against the Dutch fleet during 1846 naval battles and extolled the intervention of the Santo Rosario, won the nationwide contest sponsored by the Dominicans. So I'd like to point out at this juncture that this win, oops, not yet. Okay, that this win was an important laurel added to Nick's then growing writing credentials. Okay, so during the time of particular interest to literary writers, critics, and enthusiasts of his time was his innovative command of English. So it is often described as Spanish flavored English, an English that was, if not almost Spanish, in grammatical structure. And this is coupled with his rendering of Filipino expressions into English, or what we call Philippinism. Right. So what came with Nick's prize? Okay. The prize included an honorary degree of Associate of Arts awarded by the Pontifical and Royal University of Santo Tomas, which Nick needed in order to study and train for the priesthood at St. Albert Seminary in Hong Kong, a British colony and territory that time. Can we have the next slide, please? Right. So after the war and by choice, Nick did not pursue any formal education, and the Dominicans would only accept postulants with high school diplomas at least. St. Albert Seminary at that time, as you can see on the photo, was the novitiate and house of studies of the Dominicans, where postulants from the Philippines, China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Japan received religious and scholastic formation. So I heard that you read already The Woman Who Had Two Navels, and you would see this image, right, of St. Albert Seminary in the novel. So the time Nick spent at the seminary, despite its briefness, proved formative, not only in terms of his potential religious calling, because even when he was younger, he was considering it, but also his true vocation. It was where he came to realize with finality what he really wanted to do. And upon his return to Manila, leaving the priestly formation, he intimated to his sister in law, right, Sarah, that's all I've ever wanted to do. Okay. So from that time on, Nick would spend most of his time writing like a madman with his typewriter in his room, and his pieces began appearing again in the leading periodicals like Philippines Free Press, which in 1949 honored his short story Guardia de Honor with first prize. So they also eventually employed him as proofreader, and through the years, he would become a copy editor and then an editor himself. On the photo, you see Nick Joaquin. In the middle, that's his typewriter. I believe it's exhibited in Far Eastern University. And if you read Guardia de Honor, you would notice the emerald earrings. That is very important in that short story. Now, I'd like to put a footnote here. Earlier, I said that of particular interest to literary writers, critics, and enthusiasts of his time was his innovative command of English. Now, in Guardia de Honor, Joaquin did something new, right? Um, we can regard it, right, as a proto-magic realist. Proto because it predated the prominence of the genre, so to speak, in the works of Latin American writers in the 1960s. In Guardia de Honor, Nick made what was dismissed as unrealistic, magical, or marvelous contemporaneous with the real. So I highly recommend to those studying Nick Joaquin to read Guardia de Honor alongside his other short stories like May Day Eve and Summer Solstice. Now, going back to Nick's true vocation and his realization with finality of what he really wanted to do, which was to write, I say that anyone who seriously reads Nick's works could sense that his writing is to a particular extent priestly. The Catholic priest right now, I can imagine him presiding at the Holy Mass, right? Calling to mind anamnesis, a past which predates him, that is the fullness of the Passover, and at the same time interprets its relevance to, for, and in the present through his exegesis of the word, and celebrates it through the ritual that is the liturgy. Nick carried out this priestly performance in his works. He was calling to mind, again, anamnesis, a past which predated him, that is the Spanish Filipino Manila, and at the same time interprets its relevance to, for, and in the present through the narratives he created, and celebrates it through the ritual that is called writing. That's why I hope you can indulge me. I would say that Nick is a priest of old Manila. But, okay, Nick's sense of the past has always been picked on by critics, dismissing him as the nostalgic writer of torchlit past. What they likely missed was Nick's criticism towards being stuck in that torchlit past. To illustrate this, I'd like to refer to two longer pieces that Nick wrote when he had returned from Hong Kong. A portrait of the artist as Filipino and the woman who had two navels. Here, Nick explored the idea of doubleness. So, portrait was written for Sarah to stage, right? But she thought it impossible to do. It was, after all, a novel in the form of a play. So this piece was then published in the periodical Weekly Women's Magazine and collected together with his other earlier works in his first book, Prose and Poems, in 1952. Prose and Poems fixed his position in the post-colonial, post-World War II Philippine literary scene, where here was a collection generally described as the best of Philippine writing in English of the period. Even senior fictionists of his time, Francisco Arceliana, called the book the most distinguished body of work, with a superior clarity and a larger vision. Years later, the theater director Daisy Avellana picked up the portrait, paving the way for its theater debut in 1955, right in the ruins of Intramuros. It was well received and ended up being translated into Filipino and later on produced in film. Now, Portrait is set during the eve of Philippine campaign. So what you see is photos from the film. Okay. What is it about, right? So I will be stingy with the gist, but you can read the 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 play in the Penguin Classics. So Don Lorenzo Marasigan was a magnificent painter of the Spanish colonial era who turned into a recluse during the American occupation. He gave his unmarried daughters Paula and Candida a painting. The painting looms over their household in Intramuros. Since Paula and Candida were having difficulty in making ends meet, opportunists and their married siblings tried to persuade them to sell the painting and their storied house, but to no avail. When the city was shelled, the painter and his daughters were among the casualties. So you would ask me, where can we discern the doubleness? Let's try to consider the painting. So the painting is out of sight as it hangs on the fourth wall, in exception from the film, because they have an actual painting in the film. So when considering it, one can only rely on the dialogues, right? So Bitoy Camacho, a Marasigan family friend, says it is of a young man carrying an old man on his back, and behind him a burning city. The description resembles the flight of Aeneas and his father Anchises from Troy. Why would Don Lorenzo give such a painting to his daughters? So Paula and Candida had blamed their reclusive father for their wasted youth. Constructing the narrative this way, Nick is opening a discourse already. Paula and Candida had a wasted youth, not entirely because of Don Lorenzo's selfishness, but because they failed to carry their recluse father to the present as Aeneas had persuaded his resistant father Anchises to go with him and step into the new era. So the painting of the young carrying the old, the present being mindful of the past, is a masterpiece to Bitoy, who in the end of the play would declare, to remember and to sing, that is my vocation. Bitoy's sense of the past resembles Nick's sense of the past. The calling or mission to call to mind the past is oriented towards the present, towards the living, because the present has an agency, must be an active agent in the unfolding of time. Now, curiously, okay, to Candida, the painting is that of a monster, a man with two heads. So her perception can be interpreted in different ways. So may I offer one speculation? Perceived that way, the two heads of the said man could signify the coexistence of the past and the present, the colonial legacies of Spain and US even, if you like. But what is interesting is that Candida perceives it as monstrous, something she did not want to face. And that's the trouble. If one does not want or won't face the present of such coexistence in one body, one would be stuck nostalgic of the torchlit past, which is the case of the sisters Candida and Paula, who till the end are disciples and priestesses of their father, who had turned his back against the new and the now. That is the same accusation towards Nick, but that is in fact his subtle criticism of the Candida and Paula of his time. Theirs is a priesthood dissimilar to his, backward as it is oriented towards the past, towards stagnation, looking to the past, which already ended, in the present. So the conversation between Bitoy and Candida is an illustration of how Filipinos perceive the bequest of our past. The painting is, after all, a father's gift to his daughters, a masterpiece to celebrate or a monster to hate. And along the way, would ask, just what really is it? What is my identity? Nick's scrutinization of the concept of doubleness continues in The Woman Who Had Two Navels, which version of Two Navels is a short story collected in prose and poems. He extended it to a novel underwriting fellowships from the Rockefeller Foundation, Creative Writing Fellowship, and Eugene Saxton Fellowship, which also allowed him to travel to Madrid, Mallorca, Manhattan, and Mexico. He completed it in 1960 and won the inaugural Stonehill Award for the Filipino novel in English. It was published in 1961, and that same year he received the Republic Cultural Heritage Award from the Philippine government. So Nick would continue his kind of priesthood, calling to mind the past, interpreting it to, for, and in the present, and celebrating it through writing in the years to come. And his readers would note the progression of his ideas, especially with regard to identity, which is shaped by the past and the present. In the Philippines, the 1970s through the 1980s saw a revival of nationalistic sentiments, coupled with the rise of Marxist theory in academia and ultimately political corruption, dictatorship, and struggle for democracy. To those who are interested in this phase of Nick, I recommend the reading of The Beatas, a play about the epoch-making victory of Filipino hermanas against foreign female domination in religious life during the 16th century, published in 1976, and Cave and Shadows, a novel that conflates fact and myth, teetering the said feminist turn in a narrative that explores the turbulent period of the 1970s, published in 1983. According to Isan Wan, the Cave and Shadow forwards a perspective where history now articulates itself as a series of breaks. And we can see that in the way that Nick Joaquin resolved to intertext various narratives of historical events and legends that invites a rethinking of history and so identity itself. From that period through the 1990s, also saw the publication of his essays, whose topics range from biographical profiles of heroes, artists, politicians, and other personalities to history and cultural commentaries, to reportages, and of course to his singular and award-winning almanac for Manileños. Many of his essays were published under his pen name Piano de Manila, or Old Timer of Manila. And actually, many of his insights, as well as historical and cultural notes and theorizations, if you will, also figured in his fiction. In 1976, Nick was named a national artist for literature by the Philippine government, and 2 decades later, he received the prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award for Journalism, Literature, and Creative Communication Arts. Now, to this end, it is not too much to say that Nick's body of work from across primary literary genres is unmatched in richness and range by any of his contemporaries. And I have just given you a slice of it. So in 3 days, on the 29th, we will commemorate the 18th year since Nick peacefully passed on in his home in San Juan. So far, we were able to get acquainted with Nick Joaquin, identifying his milieu and taking note of his unique language and the leitmotifs of his representative works. We look at Hong Kong as a formative place for Nick, from where he recognized his true vocation and described him as a priest of old Manila by the virtue of his writing. And we also discern the phases of his writing and the progression of Nick's ideas as reflected in his primary fiction. My discussion of The Woman Had Two Navels is next. So it's composed of a presentation of the novel summary, and this time I will be indulgent, and an explication of select parts, the navels as specter of identity, Connie as anti-hero, and Hong Kong as liminal space. So Two Navels is set in Hong Kong on Kowloon side, sometime after the Philippines was liberated from the Japanese occupation. The novel is composed of 5 chapters, and with the 4th chapter, the Chinese Moon, as exception because it is an exposition of the unconscious of the protagonist. Each chapter has an extended background narrative of key characters, providing the novel its multi-generational and intersecting conflicts. The novel's plot revolves around the assertion of its protagonist that she had two navels, and her whole life depended on it. It unravels in a span of 3 days. So, day one. Okay, so the visit. So it was noontime when Connie Escobar visited Pepe Monson at his clinic, inquiring if he could operate on her two navels because she feared that when her husband, Macho Escobar, who she had married that morning, discovered it during their honeymoon, everything will be over. Connie is daughter of a Manila Carnival director and politician Manolo Vidal with society matron Concha Vidal. Pepe is veterinarian and one of the two sons of the old Dr. Monson, a veteran of the revolution against Spain and in the resistance against the Americans, living in exile. The other is Father Tony, a priest at St. Andrew's Convent. Macho is heir of the Visayan Haciendero clan or landed gentry. That afternoon, Concha visited Pepe. She denied everything her daughter had said, the navels, the honeymoon. She said that her daughter was there to chase Paco Tejera some more. Paco is a Hong Kong-based jazz musician who, while in Manila for a gig, met Concha and Connie. Come evening, Pepe went to Tova Rich, a pub, with his fiancee art shop owner Rita Lopez and Paco and his wife watercolorist Mary. Strangely, Concha and Connie were also individually there. Connie sent for Pepe, which ended up in them driving around. Connie shared that learning her father was an abortionist prompted her to run away when she was 15. Pepe advised her to meet Father Tony for counseling. Now, day two. It was already the first hours of the following day when Pepe escorted Connie to her hotel room. But when he was about to leave, she came rushing towards him upon learning that Nacho was in her suite. This prompted Connie to divulge the reason she had left Manila. She had found the old love letters of Macho and Concha in his closet. As a remedy, Pepe led Connie to Rita's place where she could stay till daylight. Pepe then spoke with Macho about the situation. Macho was there to fetch Connie so that Manolo could be spared of scandal. Manolo was running for office. Come daytime, Connie sought Father Tony at the convent and talked about her two navels. But Connie left as soon as Father Tony stepped out to call elderly priest Father Camacho. Over lunch, Father Tony shared with Pepe and Rita what had happened. Then they went to Rita's shop only to find Concha there. The priest accompanied her to socialite Kikay Valero's house as he wanted to track Connie's whereabouts. In the afternoon, Mary hosted a celebration of Chinese New Year and Paco's new gig. When the party was over, Paco headed to Tovarich, while Pepe and Father Tony went home. There the brothers found Connie attempting to enter the room of their father. Now, in an attempt to put an end to the two navels narrative, the brothers and Connie agreed that Pepe would inspect her abdomen. On her way to the convent to meet Father Tony, Connie turned right to the avenue leading to a cliff and speeding towards it as in a hallucination. She wrestled with the specters of Macho, Concha, Manolo, and the strange old priest with luminous eyes. Unknown to many, Connie survived the crash. And while people were ringing the New Year in, Connie broke into the house of the Monsons, meeting the old Dr. Monson, who collapsed subsequently. Afterwards, she went to Tovarich and met with Paco. Now, day three. So day two is for confrontations. Day three is for the departures. At 4 in the morning, the first day of the lunar calendar, Kikay drove to Concha's hotel to break the news. Connie's burned Jaguar was found alongside her hat and handbag floating on the bay. Meanwhile, while everyone was baffled by the news, Connie was breaking fast with Paco. And having learned of the accident at noon, Father Tony, whose father was dying at home, went to check on Concha. Then, as the brothers and Rita were discussing what had transpired, their Chinese houseboy handed them a letter from Connie informing them she had survived and left with Paco for Macau. The old Dr. Monson died. The news from Connie, however, no longer reached Concha, and Macho, for when the priest was about to announce it to them, Macho had already shot Concha and then himself. So, can you imagine how hectic those 3 days? So, physically, emotionally, mentally demanding to the characters, especially to the Hong Kong based ones who found themselves at the receiving end of the nauseating interplay between the Manila-based mother and daughter tandem, Concha and Connie, with multi-generational and intersecting conflicts in tow, which of course involved the men of their lives, Manolo, Macho, and Paco. This made Two Navels unapologetically too rich a text. So allow me to limit my discussion to these points as articulated earlier. The Navels as specter of identity, Connie as anti-hero, and Hong Kong as liminal space. So proceed with my point one. So scholar Caroline S. Howe points out in Necessary Fictions that post-independent, especially during the Third Republic, Filipino writers wrote about the many specters haunting the Filipino nation. And these specters did not simply take the form of exploitative foreigner or outsider, but the other within, an other that is also Filipino. So, when read as a national allegory, Two Navels presents identity as a specter haunting the Filipino. Here, the Filipino is haunted by what it is. Connie is bothered by her having two navels cut from a single umbilical cord of her mother. Such imagery, poetic and spectacular, as Nick was poet and playwright, prods one to consider that aside from taking those two navels as tropes for Spanish and American past, as was the common reading of it, it would also enlighten us when we consider that the doubleness was actually conceived in Concha, who grew up during the tail end of the Spanish occupation and reached adulthood during the onset of the American occupation, and who gave birth to patriotic sons by her first marriage, and ultimately by Manolo to Connie, who grew up during the period of transitions and reached adulthood during the time of independence. The contradicting colonial legacies converge, as it were, in Concha, as may be seen in her backstory in Chapter 2. But such convergence would be the very contradictions that Connie would question and try to diverge from. Here, patriotism and corruption, moral uprightness and perverseness, tradition and trends, and so on. Thus, the split of the umbilical cord producing two navels. Connie then is haunted not exactly by the colonial past, but by the very post-colonial present that she is. The Filipino of her generation then was bothered by this doubleness because they looked to a past which did not exactly belong to them, a reference that cannot exactly define their present, especially when we consider that their past and present are always already post-colonial. Concha, in her conversation with Pepe, put it this way. So people like your father were a reference, a dictionary that I always had open before me. I could never doubt how a word like virtue, for instance, was spelled. I might spell it with a B because I wanted to, or without the E because I thought it superfluous. But if I did, I knew very well what I was doing, that it was wrong. I had no excuse. But young people now, like my poor Connie, so conscious generation had a dictionary, a reference because of the likes of the virtuous and patriotic old Dr. Monson. But the generation of Connie, at least in the novel, only had Manolo and Concha, who contradicted the very reference they had tried looking up to. To someone in search of a reference, Manolo and Concha would never make a good dictionary. Thus, Connie, upon finding out her father's corruption and her mother's shenanigans, tried to dissociate from them by running away twice and looked for other references, other fathers like Biliken that she enshrined at a temple in Pinondo, and the old Dr. Monson, who she sought in Hong Kong. But running away, that dissociation is precisely what blocks her coming to terms with her present, as may be discerned during her hallucination in chapter 4. Look, child, you can't go around forever looking for swords and flags. You want heroes, and when you don't get heroes, you make up devils. But we're not heroes and we're not devils. We're just people, and you have to learn to accept us as we are. In order for Connie to face the other within, the specter within, it is necessary to first acknowledge the contradictions of her present, because that is a condition of who she is, the location where she could confront the specter. But the challenge is to never be corrupted by it, to never lose the ability to rage against it instead of clinging to it. Now, in terms of narrative discourse, Connie's running away is a necessary device, if only to illustrate the struggle with her coming to terms with her present. And in fact, if we read it via psychoanalytic trauma theory, it would give us enough data to scrutinize the possibility of Connie suffering trauma, which was hinted at as early as 1967, although not fully explicated, in Regina T. Garcia's reading of Two Navels. But Connie's running away to Hong Kong is also useful in this regard. It summons another specter within. The interaction between Connie and the brothers Monson, Pepe and Father Tony, about her two navels exposes the brothers' distinct experience of doubleness, a doubleness brought upon them by the self-imposed exile of their father, who they did not dare resist, which housed them in a bubble, a present perpetually guarded by the two small Filipino flags, right, crossed under a picture of General Aguinaldo and all of those memorabilia. So a doubleness they paid little attention to, because their present was defined by by their father, sorry, until Connie dragged them to her doubleness, to the presence of her two navels, which caused Pepe and Father Tony moral tremors. The specter within, particular to their kind, and from which their father had protected them, finally stuck its two heads out, post-colonial and diasporic. Now, this novel, The Woman Had Two Navels, does not show what's next for the brothers Monson after the initial haunting of the post-colonial and diasporic specter. Instead, Nick would problematize this specter in his other novel, Cave and Shadows. What Two Navels does is to tease it out, as seen in the characters and circumstances of the brothers Monson, their band of child exiles, which includes Paco. Paco, even as a child, knew that he was part Portuguese, part Filipino, a doubleness in which he was raised in Macau, which brought him to relocate in Hong Kong. Unlike the old Dr. Monson, Paco's father did not confine him in a bubble guarded by his past. If any, his bequest was jazz, which brought Paco to different places, including Manila, which made him at ease with cultures, a cosmopolitan. But this bequest was also his scourge. Poverty hounded Paco from his childhood in Macau to his adulthood in Hong Kong. This is why when Connie told Paco she had two navels, he believed her at once and felt not repulsion, but the heat lightnings of a desire, feverish and electric, that charged his hands with eyes and his eyes with mouths. There is a desire to see a doubleness which he himself knew in an other. What kind of doubleness does Connie have? Is she part human? Is she part monster? So upon facing the two navels, a shock of recognition struck him, making him feel that there were other eyes peering in at them, eyes avidly fastened upon them, eyes that had been watching them all that night, all the other nights before he could not, all the other nights before, and he could not doubt whose eyes they were. The two navels, their very navels, are the eyes of the specter within, peering in at them, peering in at Paco, who found discomfort in Manila, from which he sensed an unreality in its two worlds, the world of the avenue matrons and the gutter matrons, the rich and the poor, adultery and charity. This haunting moment of truth sent him sailing back to Hong Kong. But as the novel concludes, one may note that having faced the navels only made Paco desire Connie more. During their reunion at Tovarich, after Connie crashed her Jaguar off the cliff, Paco's eyes had flashed with terror when he saw her. Because what he saw was the woman who was like his wife, Mary, who, in other words, was like him, in doubleness and all the contradictions that come with it. Connie is someone Paco can identify with. So, to this point, I have illustrated how the navels function as specter of identity. In Connie's case, the haunting is directed towards an acknowledgement of the contradictions of her past. In the case of the brothers Monson, it haunted them to finally face their own doubleness. And in Paco's case, the haunting led to a recognition of an other he can identify with in the contradictions and doubleness of who they are. Indeed, the use of navel can only be apt to problematize what Howe calls the other within, the specter within. The navel, after all, as a scar, as Helen Sixty puts it, is the story of origin, of being cut from it, of carrying its wound, of being haunted by it precisely because, as Nick puts it, it is peering in at you, fastened upon you, watching you all night. There are two navels because there is an other within. So I will now proceed with my second point, Connie as anti-hero. So in his landmark critical appraisal of Nick's body of work, Subversions of Desire, One emphasizes that the gesture of defiance and self-assertion, specifically of the female characters in Nick's fiction, mediates the return of the repressed, the the post-colonial desire for self-determination, which is inconsonant with existing social relations and codes of language and sex, since the existing in a post-colonial setting is always already tempered by the colonial. A similar note may be sensed in fictionist Gina Apostol's foreword to the Penguin Classics edition of Tropical Gothic. She says that it is through the female characters that Nick diagnosed and prescribed cure to the horror of our impassioned but truncated post-colonial lives, his existential theme. In Two Navels, Connie performed this gesture of defiance and self-assertion twice in a pronounced way. When she was 15, after finding out her father Manolo Spazan as abortionist and corruption as government official, Connie ran away and refused to return to her boarding school because she refused to be educated on stolen money, which later on impressed the brothers Monson. But while this performance of defiance and self-assertion failed, in a sense, because her parents, especially her mother Concha, still prevailed over her, it served as an impetus for a more powerful gesture of defiance and self-assertion, the spectacle in Hong Kong. Why? For if not for the first gesture, Concha would not have arranged Connie's marriage with Macho. In her conversation with Pepe, Concha explains, Concha was dreadfully frightened. Connie might have fallen into worse hands, so she married her off with someone she could trust. That is her lover, Macho, who would do anything she asked and anything that would get him in her hands. But in trying to save the two people she loved most, she had destroyed them too. Thus, upon finding out the old love letters of Concha and Macha in his closet at 18, Connie carried out her final gesture of defiance and self-assertion in Hong Kong, which resulted in not only the deaths of Concha and Macho, but also in her adulterous elopement with Paco. You can read that as her defiance of Catholic tradition and morality, which is a colonial legacy, and of course, in producing the woman that she now saw walking in her bright imagined Macau. Cobbled streets winding up to a cathedral, white houses on a rocky coast. Can we have the next slide, please? Trees flowering in the blue air, etc. But this is also the very part where Connie becomes anti-hero. If we remember, Connie also went to Hong Kong in search of a Dr. Monson, so her two navels could be operated on. And going back to the point I made earlier, this move blocks her coming to terms with her present because the reference, the dictionary she was seeking out, cannot define her present. Okay, so during their impassioned meeting after her car crash, Connie and the old Dr. Monson, two generations that had lost each other, mutely implored each other's forgiveness. But curiously, between the two, it is only the old Dr. Monson who reconciled with what he had been running away from, who embraced the generations he had failed to know, whose passion he had refused to share. It cannot be said of Connie because that which she is running away from and must be reconciling with is her present. There is a gap that reconciling with the old Dr. Monson cannot close or heal. Thus, in reconciling with a past that does not belong to her, she is led to asserting herself to a present that is still haunted by a similar past, the colonial Macau, when she already came from a post-colonial present of an independent Manila. It was a step backwards, a step towards a simulacra of the cobbled streets world of the old Dr. Monson. And that is Nick's subtle criticism of those nostalgic of a past. And by doing so, disdain the present, which is theirs. So up until here, I have presented how the spectacle in Hong Kong is. On one hand, Connie's gesture of defiance and self-assertion, not only against her mother Concha, but also symbolically against colonial legacies like Catholic morality. And on the other, by the virtue of the spectacle's problematic ending, her reconciliation with the old Dr. Monson, a revelation of her being anti-hero who retreats into a present that simulates a past that does not belong to her, that is Macau. Indeed, as San Juan noticed, Nick's female character enabled the return of the repressed, but here, in Connie's case, only to get itself alienated again. An anti-hero, anti-heroic, precisely because of its refusal to be one. I mean, how cathartic it would have been had Connie returned to Manila with Paco in tow, right? But if Nick had it that way, where would his criticism lie? So, yes, let us now proceed with the final part of this segment, Hong Kong as liminal space. From the Latin limen, a liminal space is a threshold, a doorway, a portal, and as such, a space where waiting happens, interactions are exchanged, and decisions are made. Would I let the other in? Would I enter? Now, in post-colonial thought, liminal spaces are in-between spaces of ambivalence, a third space, where there is neither self nor other. In the location of culture, theorist Homi K. Baba picks up from Renee Green's Size of Genealogy in articulating how we might perceive a liminal space. So he likened it to a stairwell, right? So by default, in two navels, what is imagined as liminal space is Hong Kong. So let us try how we could appropriate Baba's definition of liminal space. So the narrative began with a conversation between Pepe and Connie. After hearing her out, he wondered, and why here? It had got to be here, right, in Hong Kong, because Connie knew what going to Hong Kong could achieve. And the fourth chapter of the novel, which lays bare her unconscious, provides us an insight into it. Reasonably, in a foreign land, hierarchies from home would be blurred or dissolved. Um, in her hallucination, Concha Vidal said to Connie Escobar, "We're not mother and daughter here now. We are two women who have only our men in common." In that liminal space, Connie had the opportunity to have it out with her husband's other woman, which she had wanted in Manila. But a confrontation, right, that cannot be fulfilled at home where hierarchies are fixed. Connie, however, did not pursue this direction. Now, aside from their actual men, like Macho and Paco, we can also consider the old Dr. Monson as one of the men they had in common. He was also being sought by Concha and Connie. And between the two, it was Connie who performed what Baba calls symbolic interaction with the old Dr. Monson. How, right? So let us return to the incident at the hotel when Connie came rushing towards Pepe upon learning that Macho was in her suite. Through that conversation, we learned that she had been staying in Hong Kong for 2 weeks already. This means that throughout the duration of her stay, Connie had been making a decision that we only see carried out during her last 3 days there. So the visit at the Monson apartment, looking for a Dr. Monson, the breaking into the same apartment during the eve of Chinese New Year where she got caught, and ultimately during the first hours of the new year after surviving her car crash, where she entered the doorway and then proceeded to the room of the old Dr. Monson, and then the confrontation happened. So we see the search, we see the denial, we see the confrontation, the direction she chose to pursue. Now, Baba also tells us that a liminal space is like the connective tissue that constructs the difference between two ends. In two navels, especially in Connie's case, Hong Kong functioned as a tissue that connected two ends without being any of the two. So on one end, there was the old Dr. Monson and his world that had ended as a childish playing at soldiers, while on the other, there was Concha, the life that went on without him, where one meditates in spite of the dragons and the jewelry, right? So the difference was constructed in that the ends did not close in on each other, they were simply there. And Baba further tells us that on a liminal space, the present can no longer be simply envisaged as a break or a bonding with the past and the future, no longer a synchronic presence. Our proximate self presence, our public image, comes to be revealed for its discontinuities, its inequalities, its minorities. On a liminal space, then, having two navels is possible, and it is not monstrous. But when Connie chose to reconcile with the old Dr. Monson and called him father, right? She was symbolically leaving the liminal space where hierarchies were dissolved and claimed a continuity with him, with the world that he represented. Connie and that which she represents was running away from the possibility of a cultural hybridity. That's why the navels must be operated on, must be corrected. And isn't this the very present that the very condition, the very post-colonial self she has been trying to dissociate with? Thus, the points I raised earlier. Connie's running away blocks her coming to terms with her present. She's an anti-hero, an anti-heroic precisely because of its refusal to be one. Now we approach the last segment of my talk, which is a postscript on Hong Kong. So we echo now the wonder, right, of Pepe, who said, "Why there?" And we would ask, "Why there?" Right? Hong Kong was a British colony and territory from 1841 to 1997. It had troubles and specters of its own. It had in Kowloon its own walled city, where refugees flocked, especially during the latter part of the Chinese Civil War. We get snippets of this in two navels, in the living conditions of the Hong Kong-based characters. Their apartments were too tiny, the band of child exiles, Filipinos flocking together, etc. And of course, the war on the other side, on the mainland Hong Kong, hinted at during Connie's car crash. But I would say that the selection of Hong Kong is strategic, symbolic, and practical in another regard, a context closer to home. To someone writing a national allegory where their other within is problematized, where a gesture of defiance and self assertion is exercised, Hong Kong would make a meaningful setting. There in Hong Kong, as you can see in the photo, nope, return please. Right. There in Hong Kong in 1897, General Emilio Aguinaldo, the first president of the Philippines, exiled, and with the settlement funds he had received from Spain, he organized his posse of revolutionaries and Filipino expatriates, forming the Hong Kong junta in preparation for his return to the Philippines. Already in this respect, we may note the liminal character of Hong Kong, a space where waiting happens, interactions are exchanged, and decisions are made. There, the Philippine flag was sewn, which General Aguinaldo hoisted on June 12, 1898 in Kawit, Cavite, declaring Philippine independence. At that time, the country was still in a state of war, this time resisting the US, which acquired the country from Spain via the 1898 Treaty of Paris. The Filipino resistance movement did not prevail over the US, which led to General Aguinaldo's capture in 1901, who eventually pledged his allegiance to the US. Theodore Roosevelt declared it over by 1902. But, as history scholar Vicente Rafael points out, the resistance continued in fits and starts until the 1930s. That is the period Nick grew up to. And from this period, we see the likes of General Ateneo Ricarte, who remained exiled in Hong Kong until around 1910, with occasional visits to the Philippines in between before settling in Japan. And in 1942, with the occupying Japanese forces, the old general returned, and later on, historian Ambet Ocampo would comment, Ricarte lived too long, right? By joining the Japanese against his old enemy, the United States, he became not a hero, but a heel. Here we see an almost similar but not quite flair, right? With which Nick created the character of the old Dr. Monson, whose resistance had ended as childish playing at soldiers. So on the photo, you see the Hong Kong junta, the group photo, and then you also see a news clipping of the Declaration of Philippine Independence, and then you see General Ricarte, right, in the photo. So, okay, next slide, please. There in Hong Kong as well, on personal level, as pointed out in the first segment where Nick realized his true vocation with finality, which was to write, he did not become a Dominican priest, right? So earlier we ordained him a priest of Old Manila. But his familiarity with Hong Kong had also stemmed from his relationship with his eldest brother, Porfirio or Ping, who was a jazz musician and toured a string of Asian countries, including Hong Kong, during the teenage years of Nick. In the memoir of Ping's son, Tony, Hong Kong was described as among the few countries that treated performers with dignity that should come with work. Thus, it was a staple stop to touring artists or musicians at that time. There, they were not at the mercy of the hotel or pub managers who would take advantage of them and their earnings. One can speculate now that the stories he knew from his brother, coupled with his own, were from where the circumstances of the band of child exiles, which includes Paco, the brothers Monson, Rita, and Mary, and the flappers like Concha and Kikay were imagined. So from these two strings, Hong Kong is liminal because on one hand, it was a place of formation where a life-changing decision would be made, and on the other, it was a mere stop, but a stop where polarities were, in a sense, dissolved. Now, post two Navels era, Hong Kong would continue its liminal character with regard to Filipino contemporary mobility in the 1970s through the 1980s, when the Philippines became a major labor exporter, and during the worldwide recession, Filipinos seeking employment were deployed primarily to the Middle East. But in the 1990s, the direction shifted to Asia. You can see there a report from ASEAN Economic Bulletin. So people would go to Hong Kong, Filipinos, as domestic workers. This movement to Hong Kong continued through the 2000s onwards, And of course, there would be other professions like hospitality management and entertainment, and other reasons like tourism, building travel credentials, pursuing graduate studies. And for the rich, getting their authentic Chinese fix on weekends, because it's very near. In under 3 hours, you're there by plane. And it shares the same time zone with Manila. So going back to the overseas Filipino workers, collectively they help and continue to help the Philippine economy through their remittances. And we even call them bagong bayani or new heroes. So their lives and struggles would be featured in films primarily. And within the last decade, we saw the likes of the award winning documentary Sunday Beauty Queen, which followed five Filipino domestic helpers in Hong Kong as they respectively go about their daily grind and prepare at the same time for a beauty contest. I had students who were working on this documentary, and I told them to consider the contest as a parody, in the sense of Linda Hudson, a transgressive art, a critical art. We also saw within the last decade, Hello, Love, Goodbye, our country's highest grossing film of all time. So one string of that film explicitly touched on the liminality of Hong Kong in the sense that it was a space where waiting happens. So the protagonist there was saving for her employment to the next destination, which is Canada. So it was a space where interactions were exchanged. So she was working as a domestic worker, sending money at home, finding love in there. And ultimately, it was a space where decisions were made. There, the protagonist decided to move on to her next destination where she could finally practice her nursing degree, even if it would mean she would disappoint the people she loved, just like Connie, right? So the direction taken and not taken by the hundreds of thousands of Filipinos in Hong Kong then and now. So, right, within the last hour, I have spoken about the Filipino writer Nick Joaquin, his masterpiece, The Woman Who Had Two Navels, and of course, Hong Kong, which figures as a liminal space in Joaquin's life in the novel and in Philippine history and contemporary mobility. I now conclude my talk here. Thank you, Frank, for assisting with my slide deck, and thank you all for listening.
This is wow. So thank you, Raymond. This is wonderful. Of course, I'm still under the impression trying to sort out, your the tapestry of your presentation. My sense is that, of course, because in your bio note you mentioned you took it to heart that you say that yourself, is a very interesting the works of Joaquin, and you identify yourself as a Joaquin, someone who's been working on Joaquin. So I think this is something that you have done, for a period of time. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and research. So I guess number one, that you gave us an introduction and the sharing this very precious historical news clippings and photos from the past. So we get to see old Manila as Joaquin must have seen himself. And also then you divided your talk into three parts, that the two navels, you say that it's like a specter, hunting and hunting from within. And I think this is really interesting, and I'd like to follow up on that. And then the second part is your reading of this female protagonist, Connie Escobar, and you gave us a wonderful reading of her career in the novel, right? And argues that she functions very much as an anti-hero. And then the third part is where you focus on the function of the place Hong Kong, where you incorporate the notion of liminality from Homi Bhabha, and argues how Hong Kong as a real place, but also as a symbolic space that is both within and without, that is an in-between space. And the final touch is that how within the more recent years that Hong Kong is a place where we received hundreds, thousands of migrant workers from the Philippines. So then by doing that, bringing us to a more recent point of conjunction with regard to the travels and migrations, between Philippines and Hong Kong. So thank you for this wonderful and very rich talk. So I guess the floor is open. One thing I'd like to follow up is that with my research on Joaquin, a lot of people have said and written about, that his work is Gothic. And I think, in this particular novel, because the Penguin collection, published in 2017, also has selections from Tales of Tropical Gothic. So if we read him as a Gothic writer, and I think, that the Two Navels is in this way a wonderful illustration in terms of this notion of Gothic. Throughout your presentation today, the first part is about the part on the specter, and I wonder how you would like to say a little bit more about Joaquin as a writer, and also about this, this monstrosity of this two navel, this woman, the body, with the two navel. It dawns on me that this is actually this body of two navel, okay, thinking of this, the spread of the national territories of the Philippines, the 17,000 islands, okay, it's literally, the body of a wound, it's a body that shows, this wound, the wound from the two history of colonization, so that this I really like your notion of this, this haunting from within, the specter from within. This is a body that is very much harassed. It's a body, is very much abused, thinking of this body of two members. So this is my sort of, what I'm thinking now. If you can say a little bit more about this, this notion of the Gothic, and also about the body of the nation, reading the novel as a national allegory, that Connie, this woman who's seeking medical help, is really, referring to the body which has been so much being abused throughout the generations of colonization. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Professor Iping. Right. I'm just too happy that you invited me to talk about Nick Joaquin this afternoon. Right. But about, I formulated, right, my first point during my discussion of Two Navels based on the comment of Carol Howe, where she said that writers during the time of post-independence are haunted by specters, and these specters are sometimes the other within, right? So that's why I formulated the idea that there is in each of a post-colonial person, maybe the Filipino, right? The possibility of having two navels is possible because there is an other within. So there is an other that has another navel making two navels. And if we look at the way Nick constructed, right, every time that the two navels would be brought up, there should be another person. Someone has to look at it. And it can't be many. There's always two. So on one hand, there is Pepe and Connie. On the other one, there is Pepe and Paco. And then on the other one, it's supposed to be there should be three, right? Pepe, Tony, and Connie. But Tony refused. Okay, so the two navels would only exist if there is an other that's looking at it. So in the scene, beautifully and violently depicted in the novel, right? Paco, right, was looking at the navel. They were both naked, right? And he saw the eyes, which we read as navels earlier. And that would only become possible because there is one navel in Connie, there is another navel in Paco that are haunting the two of them. And in them, there exists, the spectral navel, making them, the two of them, right, each having two navels. Now, in terms of the Gothic, the use of these strangeness and all of that, I think it would be a good device that Nick used because when you talk about someone having two neighbors, that would not make sense, right? I mean, it would only make sense if there is something haunting, gothic, or supernatural going on. And that's what Nate tried to do in Two Navels. That's why if you look at it, when we read the narrator's part, the narrator's part was actually sounded like, it's something horror was going on, right? There are eyes peering in at them and all of these things. So I think that is a device that Nick Joaquin used, if only to communicate what he was trying to say about people having two navels, the post-colonial condition of having two navels. I'm not sure if I answered you correct.
No, no,
If
no.
I
That
addressed.
there's yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you. Yes, right. Yeah, I really like it. Yes. Um, when I read the novel, I was thinking two neighbors symbolizes, the two colonizers, one Spain, the other the U.S. But now I'm looking at the metaphor of the two neighbors as the spectral you know haunting one and the other, back and forth. And it works so well with, the pairs of the characters, the Bebe and his brother Tony, and Bebe and Bebe, and his best friend Paco, right? And Paco's
Yes.
wife, good wife, Mary, and Rita,
Rita.
right? Yeah, Mary and Rita, and then Concha and Connie, mother
Connie.
daughter pair, also, and also the two venues, Hong Kong, and where the family on exile, the Monsons, where they
Yeah.
have to claim the foreign home, right? And in the novel, Hong Kong, in many ways, okay, especially in the reminiscence of the father, General Monson, it reminds him, the old man, so much about Manila, the Manila on the river, so
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
so the two spaces, they can function as, two well, two neighbors, they seem to, say so much, echo so much, the mountains and the waters, of the two venues, the city of Manila on the river, and the island of Hong Kong. So I guess, and this is literally how Paco, no, how Connie going away, and how Concha follows her, and how, so there's lots of coming and going between the two venues, between Hong Kong and Manila. And
Yep.
historically, as you have mentioned, that Hong Kong is also an important locale for the generation of, the revolution, people like the father, the father figure, I mean General Monson, but also the historical person, historical figure, Igi Guado, right? The general,
Yeah.
the national father, the no, the first president of the Philippines, right? So there's
Right.
been, right, so that yeah, the two places, right? The two places, Hong Kong and Manila, right? So yes, thank you. I really like this metaphor, the rating you gave, the specter within. And I think that is wonderful. Yes, that shed lights on this on this metaphor of the two navels. Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. So I would like to see if anyone would like to follow up with the conversation. Yeah, Alex, is that
Hi,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
Alex. Yeah.
On the same point, you said that some people had written, and you agree that Connie has signs of trauma, but then later, or even earlier in your talk, you said that the haunting is not from the past, but the present. I wonder if you can expand on what exactly
All
this
right.
means with temporality.
So, okay, the trauma of Connie, right? If we want to look at it first on her, I mean, the actual experience. So, uh, if I would recall Regina Garcia, who first wrote about it, and then she said there are two traumas. First, finding out that her father is an abortionist. The other one is uh, finding out that Macho was the lover, right, of her mother, Concha. So if we apply, right, psychoanalytic trauma theory there, we would be led to an understanding, right, that because the finding out already, the finding out of the abortion past of his father, and then the finding out of the relationship of her mother with her husband now is not part exactly of colonial past. It's part of her present, her own experience. So if we will be strict with the with psychoanalytic trauma theory here, right? And we have the expert in the room, Dr. Martin. Okay. Um, we would be led, if you follow through chapter 4, you would get all the data that you need to prove that Connie on personal level was going through a particular trauma based on what happened to her present as a child of Manolo and Concha, her present as a child, as a wife of Macho. Hello? Did I address your...
I had one thought about it. Because actually, like you say, the trauma of these incidents is
Yeah.
actually momentary trauma. Like the trauma happens when she finds out about these things. It's like an event. And in the same
Oh,
sense, the
yeah.
navels, the trauma about the navels is also related to her first finding out that she has two navels,
Ah,
because she talks about not knowing she has two navels for some time,
no,
and
I
then
don't
later
connect.
feeling.
Right. Sorry. I don't connect the two navels and the trauma reading, right? When I say she can be diagnosed with someone that's going through trauma, right? I'm pertaining to what happened to her backstory. Okay, not exactly as Connie, as as a as a representation, for example, of the nation Philippines. But when I because it's psychoanalytic, right? So it has to be something about the particular person. So it would be helpful first if we psychoanalyze trauma first, psychoanalyze Connie first, before delving into what happened to the nation. Because that's how you will find the connection after. For example, if you followed through the history bits and pieces that I said about history, you would see that in the experience of Connie, there's also that kind of being told it's not yet, you cannot do this yet, right? And then you can read, for example, the way Concha arranged the marriage, right, with Macho. You can read that as the way, the deal with Spain and US was made, right? Wherein Filipinos were made to believe they will be, independent. But then again, afterwards, they were betrayed, okay? You can read all of these things. But I think when you work on psychoanalytic trauma theory, you have to first psychoanalyze the character first before making the allusions to the something larger context that you might want to arrive at. So that's how I dealt with it when I was a grad student. I wrote about it, for a class. So that's how I dealt with it. I psychoanalyzed first Connie before I was able to find out the connections with the larger context of the traumatic experiences that we identified in Connie. So hello.
Yeah, I hear you at least.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
do have couple of Raymond mentioned Jocelyn Martin, and I like to shout out to Jocelyn if you like to make a few remarks.
Hello.
Oh,
Hello,
hi.
everyone. Hi, Iping.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Hi. Hi, Raymond. Thank you. That was such a super interesting talk. I think I don't know if anyone else also ever mentioned or Nick Joaquin as the priest of Old Manila. We should attribute that to you, I think. Yeah. Yes, it's just to contribute a bit. I know there may be other questions, but yeah, this is such a fascinating novel. The two Navels, of Nick Joaquin, and how even the novel itself could be read also, among other things, could be read as in trauma aesthetics, for example. And for example, the classic chapter 4 as a form, although it is a novel, but it's the chapter 4 where there's this dream sequence, is completely this. One could say it's like the acting out, in Freudian terms, acting out of this trauma of her several encounters with the men, but with the past, and this liminal status, liminal status between the past and the present, which Joaquin problematizes, actually, being found not only in liminal Hong Kong at that time, but in this liminal situation of the history of the Philippines. And the fact also, the existence of Billiken, as Raymond pointed out, is this, this figure of escape. She's trying to replace the reality check, how normally one has to, in the talking through, in the working through of trauma, one really has to have this reality check, and the Billiken does not allow her this reality check. It's like this escape that always introduces this possibility of escape instead of the reality check. I really liked what you said, Raymond, of also of the liminality of. Sorry, this is jumping to another topic already. But for example, Paco, listening to you, he is not just. He also introduces Macau, in the picture. So it's not just this hybrid figure of a Portuguese Filipino, if I'm right, in Hong Kong, but from Macau, and a jazz player at that. also, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, jazz as well is, you know, is hybrid, if we can say that. Sorry, I'm blabbering a bit, but yeah, this is just to contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Good to
Yeah,
see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
yeah. Is that Lulu? Yeah, I never thought much, about Macau, but then since we gave, the focus on Hong Kong, but I guess the mention and literally the fact that he is, both he and the mother,
Yeah.
from Macau, and so that, I think, in my next reading, I'm gonna to pay more attention to the space of Macau and how, that again, this notion of the repeating islands, my reading is that how the city of Manila, mirrors so much about this, the cluster of, of Hong Kong, especially with regard to this exilic family of the Monsoons. But then, I didn't pay much attention to Macau. So thank you, Raymond, that in your talk, it dawned on me that the fact that Paco coming from a hybrid, right? And also Macau being a island space, and also an island space receiving lots of migrants coming and going. So yes, there, I can imagine there's definitely another chapter, no, another paper that someone can write about, this liminal space of Macau in two navels. Yeah. Mhm. Another question that I have, this is again for everyone, okay, because I know that Oscar is here, and Alex, the big number one novel when it comes to the figure of Spectre is Beloved, the novel, powerful novel by Toni Morrison, in which we have this embodied the return of this daughterly figure, and throughout this, novel, hunting the mother, because the daughter thinks that, that she was in a way murdered by the mother, but also hunting in the sense of, the history of slavery. But then this big number one novel in terms of post-colonial, this coming back, Return of the Repressed, was published in 1987. Am I right? The Beloved. And the fact that two navels, and it is such a powerful post-colonial, a spectral, metaphor, imagery, was already out in 1961. So I don't know if Raymond or anyone would like to say something about the fact that the metaphor or the motif of the ghost, or the specter, has been so central and critical in post-colonial imagination. But when we say post-colonial imagination, well, personally, that I am referring to the writing done by people in North America, African American writers or Caucasian writers, But then, I find, that that's something that we ought to do in recognition of this, powerful mastery representation of the specter, in terms of post-colonial imagination, which, was done by Joaquin around the time, right after World War II. So I don't know if anyone, here, Olga, or Lulu, or Vince, that you would like to say something about the post-colonial imagination of the specter.
Maybe if I may comment, right? Spectre's ghost, right, is, and in Filipino culture, we kind of believe in them, so they are part of our daily lives, right? So it's easy for the writers to integrate that, just like the way I think the Latin Americans will do,
Mm,
right?
mm,
So
mm, mm.
it's part of it. So it's not so much really strange, right, that you see in Philippine literature these ghosts, these specters. Sometimes they are characters indeed in some short stories, right? But Mam Lulu would probably have more contribution than my comment on the ghost.
Lulu, you have to unmute yourself.
My interest is a little far from the topic. I think broader than the specter itself. Maybe of another specter. The specter of the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Okay, got that.
Yeah, because I think there's no doubt that Nick Joaquin is such a fine author. I mean, to say the least, right? But there are people like Nick Joaquin elsewhere in Southeast Asia that are just as fine, or perhaps for different reasons. For example, Pramudia Anuntatur, right, from Indonesia. Even our own Epshanil Jose, right, who's wonderful as well, differently from Nikokin, of course, because he sticks to the mode of realism, no, less so for Nikokin, because Nikokin brings in specters, and all those that you usually don't find in realist works. I wonder if you've thought about this, Raymond. If they're so good, why don't they win the Nobel? What's your thinking about this?
Oh, maybe the reach. I
Thought.
don't know the reach, because Penguin, for example, Penguin just recently published, okay, 2017, I think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I
I
think
have that.
it also has something to do with the reach of how, although I can't remember now which exactly, because when I was younger, I saw a book, two Navels in one of the Eastern European languages. I just forget which particular, but he's been translated in there. But maybe it's because of the reach.
Well, I don't know about the reach, because as far as I know, Nikokin, Johnny Luce, and Pramoja's novels have been translated in over 1,000 languages. If they're not
Yeah.
reading enough people, I don't know why. So anyway, I think my point is, there's something else that we need to be thinking about, when we think about our great authors, so-called, right? And this is about locating them in the larger scheme of things. Of course, that scheme of things will depend on how you look at it and where you're coming from, right? But if reading the novel has to do with fine writing, I think our Southeast Asian authors have long qualified, right? So we should be asking also, when we analyze their works, maybe what maybe we should also ask why and how they're regarded in relation to other authors, of course by us first, right? Because they are our authors, and they talk about them, they talk about us, but also how they are probably regarded elsewhere, so that we can kind of compare and see how they fare in ways that we wish to understand them, right? So really, I was just interested, Raymond. Now, what do you think? If you compare Nicotine with the works of other Nobel Prize winner that you've read, what do you think? How does he rate for you personally? I'm not asking for any universal or abstract.
Personally,
Mm.
well, maybe the
Personal.
most accessible for me would the Latin American writers. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think.
No, you mean but you're I think you're hitting a point there. So for a while I was suspecting maybe because realism. It's such an old-fashioned mode, and Nobel judges are not so fascinated by it anymore. They're probably more interested in magic of the
Yeah.
kind now that the Latin Americans have written or elsewhere, right? But anyway, that's a food for thought. It really is something that I thought we might want to think about because it is important.
Right. Thank you, Lulu. And I think that Nathan, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Uh, yep. Hi everyone. I'm Nathan from the Ateneo. Um, yeah. What prompted my raising my hand, no, was actually Ma'am Lulu's comment on, or question rather, on why Southeast Asian writers have a hard time, or I think they haven't won Nobel Prize. And I recall a reading that we had in Doc Serrano's class, hi sir, by Benedict Anderson. I forgot the exact title of the reading, but I think there in that maybe Doc Serrano would like to pitch in later. I don't know. But in that reading, I think one of the things that Anderson argues for, no, is that the Southeast Asian writers have less of a cohesive national identity, um, probably because of colonial histories, right? And so that sort of colors the judgment of the Nobel Prize winners. Well, if I'm wrong, Sir Serrano will correct me. But I also actually have a question. Yes, that's the reading. Benedict Anderson, The Unrewarded. Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah,
So is this
and
a recitation already?
no, no, yeah, no. I actually also have a question for Sir Ritumban.
Yes, Nathan.
Um, yes, hi, sir. Yeah, when we were talking about your presentation today, I think last week you were talking about how your reading of this novel is quite different from existing readings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you showed that, you indicated a bit of that in how in your reading of the Navels and what they signify in the novel. I guess my question would be, given this again, to use a religious term, because Joaquin is quite, I don't know, also religiously oriented. What does your heterodox reading of Joaquin contribute to current Joaquin scholarship? How do you think this reading sort of enlivens this discourse on Joaquin? And what do you think is the significance of your research, this particular reading of Joaquin, to current
Oh,
scholarship, no, on Joaquin? So that's my question. Yeah, thanks.
well, I
Hmm.
think Joaquin specifically highlights the aspect of what do you call that? Not reconciliation, the aspect of now I forget it, the term. The the aspect of being able to start again. Can you give me the term from from your church thing? There is a term there. I forgot now. Um, the term salvation, s- not about salvation.
Redemption.
No. The I forgot.
Resurrection to start again.
To start, no, not exactly resurrection, but um, you know when you fall and then there is this chance to rise up again.
Redemption.
Sorry,
Redemption.
Redemption.
redemption, redemption, sort of, because he always highlights it. For example, in the novel, right? The postscript of Connie, she said, I'm doing this terrible thing now, hopefully to find the right path again. Something like that. Wait, let me get the novel. Okay. So she said, I mean, that's exactly Nick. Um, wait. So Please tell Father Tony I'm sorry I didn't find the courage to do the right thing. But he knows that for people like me, it takes a lot of courage to do anything at all, even wrong. And having found the courage to do this, now I may yet find the courage to do the other thing too. This is something very Catholic. You know, the chance to do something right, right? I think, Nathan, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Is that what you're asking? Yeah, is
Well,
that what you're asking?
sorry, I think I confused I confused you a bit no with my use of the terms. I guess my question would be lang given your sort of different reading from other, you know, how other scholars would read the Navels, your reading is a bit different from that, right? So I was just wondering how your reading can contribute to the current scholarship. How does it, for
Oh,
example, parang renew our understanding of Villa? Not Villa, sorry. Nako.
Joaquin. Ibang
No,
tao na yon. That's
Joaquin.
a different person,
Yeah.
Nathan.
Oh my
But I
goodness.
think
Yeah,
the
sorry.
difference, right? The difference would be, instead of dismissing Nick as a, nostalgic writer of the torchlit past, we can finally claim him as a very someone post-colonial writer that he is, right? When you talk about the possibility of, the two navels in the way I explained it earlier, I think that would explain why sometimes the thing with other people who would treat Nick is that they would simply dismiss him. Oh, he's here again, another Nick Joaquin story, another, mindful of the past, yearning of the past, nostalgic of the past, etc., etc., etc. But I think what we need to realize now is to rethink Joaquin, how he is actually contradicting the very criticism that's being put on him, and I think we can do that. In the way, I have illustrated it earlier, right? How he was actually contradicting the things that are being put on him as, just a simple old man, nostalgic writer of the past, right? So we can reimagine Nick now, especially we'll be celebrating the death of Nick soon.
Hi, Suzanne. Yeah, great to see you, Suzanne. You want to say hello, or Suzanne? So yeah. Anything to say to us or to Raymond?
Hi, Ibu Susan.
Yeah, Ibu
Hello.
Suzanne. Yes.
So I'll just be looking forward to Jokja October.
Of course. Yeah, of
Yes.
course.
Yeah.
Right.
Raymond, I have one little point.
Yo, yes, ma'am.
Yeah. What's at stake? Why are we doing this? Is this just to contradict? Is your reading just to contradict the critiques or the criticism that have been leveled against Nikokin? Is there a further point you want to raise here?
Yeah, to
Oh,
follow
no.
up with that, Raymond, I like the point that you're saying that Joaquin, it's not just nostalgic, reminiscence of the good, Manila, that he is actually a post-colonial writer. So within the context of two navels, who is his agency? Who is his agency for this, post-colonial, resurrection, the post-colonial, imagination and post-colonial transgression. Can you identify a character who does that?
Connie.
Yes, Connie, of
Her being
course.
anti-hero. Her being
Yeah.
anti-hero.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it in the aspect of, let's say, abjection, right, that would further the reading that I gave, right? But yeah, I'm not doing a different reading of Nick, right? Because, if I may share, when I was a grad student, a young one, so I tried emailing Carol Howe and asking for her paper for a copy of her paper, and then she was so welcoming, and then she told me she's happy that younger generation is rediscovering Nick Joaquin. So I think that's the inspiration also to rediscover, reimagine how we can read Joaquin today, especially the younger ones. So that's the inspiration.
Yeah, of course, but transnationally or transculturally, because I don't think I can claim that I am one of the young ones. Okay, but the trans-Pacifically or trans-oceanally, I discovered Joaquin in the summer. I have the book, it's bookmarked in 2019. I think the first time ever as a student of the English language. Okay, I'm sorry. That I discovered Joaquin. So that's why, I was like, are you kidding me? This guy writing about a story like this, a spectralized body of this woman figure, So I immediately, my point of reference was Toni Morrison, because I was a student of the English language, especially the American English. So that's also why the point of reference, so Joaquin is the one who teaches me, who opens the door for me, who connects me with Lulu and everything, that I think that I ought to know something about the Philippines. They speak the language that I am learning, that I'm still learning throughout my life. Okay. That I think, so what I'm saying is that along with my students and myself, that the student of the English language and literature of people here on this island, I think we discovered, a couple of us, right, discovered Joaquin, and Joaquin for me personally is the one who truly makes a connection, because he was born at the tail end of the Spanish days. So he's the one who saw that, the beauty, the Baroque the architecture before the bombing and all that. So you are very right. He's a priest of old Manila. And yeah, so I think so in this regard, he is, people say that nostalgic, but I guess your reading really puts him on a different path. That this imagination of this woman, this seductive and beautiful and crazy woman of Connie Escobar, this woman with her two navels, truly represents the power and the beauty of monstrosity and the hybridity and everything that comes alive with from the past to the present. Yeah.
Right. I think we can also read The Woman Who Had Two Navels in the context of the refugees, right? In Hong Kong as a refugee colony before, right? I mean, someone would say that Hong Kong was built as a city of refugees. He described the lives of what he called the band of child exiles in the novel. So I think that is one way to bring Nick also in contact with other writers, or the works of other writers in our neighboring islands, archipelago, the struggle of the refugees, of migrants, right? Because why does it have why does Connie
yeah, because
go?
in the novel, both Bebe and Marco, Paco, they reference their childhood, growing up on this foreign island. It is basically like they felt very much disconnected, but then there's no other places where they could go. They have to stay. They are stranded in this way. That is very much like the life of the refugees. They are liminal. They have no other places to go, and it is because I mean, yes. Yes, so this is so powerful. I mean, oh, this is simply just powerful. I truly admire Joaquin. Yeah.
Iping, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Have you tried teaching a Nick Joaquin story for your own classes in Taiwan?
Yes. Didn't I tell you that we actually have a graduate student from the Philippines and I think he is here. Joma, you want to say hello? So he introduced me to the short story, and Joaquin has many, right? So Joma introduced me to one of the best, which is Three Generations, and we read it last week. Yeah, and my students they were so impressed. You know, the tensity, and this, this family, dimension, this father-son relationship, it is just simply unbelievable, right? We read, of course, lots of, mother-daughter stories, but this one is particularly about the father-son relationship. Yeah. So Suzanne, do you have taught Joaquin in Indonesia, have you?
No.
Oh,
I was going to follow it up with a question for Raymond. Raymond, you taught this for our students in Ateneo?
I taught Cave and Shadows.
That is so familiar to our high school students. It's May Day Eve, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
taught
I wonder how the reception is these days. The last time we taught that, I think the reaction was not very good because of, Nick Joaquin's English is not quite English as we know it. I mean, coming from the American type of English, it's kind of Latinate, I mean, look at the second paragraph, I think, of Mayday Eve. It's a long, I mean,
one paragraph, one
even
sentence paragraph.
Yeah, but I think, Vincent is so right. Vince, in the conference that I went a couple years back, Vince gave a presentation, and also he has some
Yes.
essay on the Baroque style of Joaquin. I think, this notion of parallelism,
Right.
this coming and going, this
Very, very rich, interesting, and very rich
yeah,
reading.
this, Hong Kong, Manila, coming and going, and with everything that goes into, yeah, Vince, you want to say something? Here we go, Vince.
Professor, can I please ask a question before
Oh
we
yeah,
move
sure.
along?
And this is one of my student. Yes, Alex. Can
Thanks.
we ask Alex tell us his questions? Yes, go ahead.
It's regarding this title of Priest of Manila, because I didn't know before the reading that Nick Joaquin had been a priest, and this sort of now colors my, or in training, isn't that what Raymond said? Yeah, in training. So then this colors my reading of the appearance of the priest near the end of the 4th chapter. I wonder if you could help us read this character.
The priest.
The priest. Oh, no, Nick Joaquin was a postulant at the Dominican Seminary in Hong Kong, and then that's where he realized that a priesthood was not for him, and he returned and he started writing, the Portrait of the Artist, The Woman Who Had Two Navels, the big titles that he produced. I think the priest, because even in the other novel, right? He would always have a priest character in his work, so that must be his, I don't know, frustration coming out, or
Alex,
his.
Alex, he had really wanted to become a Dominican. That's why.
Yes. Even when he was young, and then he took the opportunity when he won the award for the Naval de Manila. And if I'm not mistaken, one of his awards, he donated the medal to the Blessed Virgin, and he was really devout. I mean, he attends the mass every day and all of that. So
This is why in this passage, the priest is
Mhm.
actually quite critical of Connie. And in your reading, like post-colonial reading, what does this mean?
Oh, a priest is a colonial agent, right? The short of it, I mean, and then, right? But here you see, in the end, it's the priest who stood by Connie. I mean, he defended the adultery. I think that would be a good
So
reading also when you follow the train, because for example, in Cave and Shadows, in chapter 4 of the Womanhood to Navels, one of the specters was actually a priest, right? So you can see that as a haunting of the colonial legacy, imposing, Catholic ideals, Catholic morality, and all of that. That's one way of, kind of
But
reading it.
Nick Joaquin, as a devout person, is this his intention also?
Um, we cannot know for sure the authorial intent, but I think he wants to show also, right, that priests are human. I think you see the humanity also in, if you study the characters, they are very human. The way he created them, crafted them, very human. It's something that's very real, right? But then the circumstances are, sometimes spectacular.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Raymond, one final point. Joyce, would you like to say something? I was just going to
Hi,
butt-
Manulu. Yeah,
go ahead.
no, just to contribute to that, I think I sense that in Nick Joaquin, this sense of priesthood, he extends it even to non to lay people. Like, for example, at the end of the two Navels, when Connie meets the old Monson, it was there when they formulated "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." But he's the real father now. Like it extends to, as you quite rightly say yourself, Raymond. Nick Joaquin is the priest of the old Manila, so this priesthood is extended even to lay people in that sense.
Mhm.
And even if I can even extend it to Cave and Shadows,
Yes.
the woman is babaylan in that sense. She's the body that is offered on this stone altar in that sense, is a very priestly invocation as well. So he has I think Nick Joaquin has this broader sense of there's always this sublime aspect
Exactly.
in
That's
Yeah.
the
Nick Joaquin.
point.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but it's
Yes.
extended in a way, the sublime is extended to other characters, which also can be discussed in another.
Yeah. We have
way.
another question from a student of mine. This is Soini, who is from likewise, island. You want to say something about your island, Soini?
I wanted to make a comment in relation to this discussion about the use of the priest and priesthood. If we go back to probably like Shakespeare and then come forward, right? It's this kind of examination of religion, its influence both on a positive side and on a negative side in the lives of characters. Then if I bring it forward to even Caribbean writers, post-colonial writers who would probably have a similar kind of perspective as Nick Joaquin, it's this double situation of religion and priesthood. It's influence, yes, it's an influence that we have because of colonialism, but also how does this influence positively work in the society as well? Because we can't avoid it, it's already there. So what has it done positively and negatively? So among the characters, you see that comfort can come from it, and at the same time, you also get that side of like rebuke. So it's like a kind of double situation. Well, that's how I read it, because that's how I notice it in the Caribbean post-colonial writers as well. So like Jamaica Kincaid, and others would refer to this concept of priesthood because Catholicism, the Anglican Church, the Methodists, that have been strong influences in these different islands that were colonized, and how it has this it's a double approach. So we can't just look at it as only something negative and dominating, controlling, but we also look at it from that aspect of the comfort and love as well, that it can bring a place of refuge in the midst of everything that's happening.
Yeah, just a quick note. This is Soini Clark Palmer, who's from the island, in the Caribbean, from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So yeah, thank you. So she's of course knowledgeable in Caribbean literature. So from time to time, she shares with us her reading. So thank you, Soini. And Vince, you want to say something? This is Professor Vince Serrano, whom Nathan mentioned, okay, and who is a big reader, a great critic on the work of Nick Joaquin. Great to have you here, Vince.
Hi, Vince.
Everyone. I think
Strategy
hello.
award.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hello.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to, just taking off na from what Soyini was saying about doubleness. That's a very very strong motif, no. In Baroque literature, Baroque inspired literature. I'm coming off from thinkers like Alejo Carpentier, for example, who would theorize about Baroque, the marvelous real, and so on and so forth. The category, I think, taking off from Carpentier, etc., would be the category of excess. Okay, so that I think partly explains the kind of like maximal impression we get of Nick Joaquin. Okay, but I think of course as Carpentier explains it, the notion of excess, maximalism, the centrifugal force of Baroque writing is against their kind of like inheritance of the European Baroque. Okay, so in that sense, the Latin American Baroque, the Caribbean Baroque was very conscious of writing against a particular European heritage, so-called. I'm also taking off from this notion of the Baroque from Blanco, Judy Blanco, when he would think about the Baroque in his essay, I think about on Portrait of the Artist. But this time, the Baroque aesthetics would be coupled to a very Benjaminian analysis of ruin. Okay, so if we look at not just to Navels, which is haunted by failures of revolution and so on and so forth, but even more so Portrait of the Artist, which was very literally set within ruins of Manila. That's Blanco's also reading of the scenography of Portrait of the Artist. It is typified by ruin, and I think it's the way in which Joaquin historicizes Manila through ruins, through figures of the Baroque excess, and so on and so forth. Which is why I think, it's a high time to revalue such aesthetics. Okay, in that sense, and see if in 2023 it still holds water. But thanks for the opportunity to discuss.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Yeah, great. Baroque aesthetics through the ruins. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
And the navels.
Yeah, sure.
Excess navel.
Including that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we can sort of wrap up. I wonder if people here can you turn on your camera? Vince, can we look at you again so that we can have a screenshot for the records? Wow, Suzanne. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dean Suzanne Sidonghang, who hosted the wonderful Critical Islands study conference that we had last year. And if you are interested, hi, this is Alex, okay, and Frank. Can we take a look at you, Frank? You are still here with us? Yes, this is Frank. And we have someone, okay, from Central America, Alex Sogo. Alex, yeah. So Frank, please take a screenshot. Okay, thank you so much. And this is Alan. Alan would like to. This is also one of our students in our master program. So thank you very much. Oh, here's Alex. Yeah, Alex. He's from Guatemala. Yeah, so he is also, when we talk about Latin America, magical realism, our mother's real, and how we every day, that we live with the ghost, right?
Let me introduce Mayel. Mayel is here. She's from Critica Cultura. She's in the staff.
Oh, sure. Yeah, hi. Yeah.
Hi. How are
So
you?
wonderful. Yeah. And Alex, Alex Xing, who asked the first and the many questions, is from Austria. Yeah, he is a Chinese Austrian and who is on exchange here from his home university in Germany, Freie University in Germany. Yeah, so that's why he is here. So Frank, can you take the screenshot? Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you done that? Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful. So first of all, I thank, of course, Raymon Ritumbán. Thank you so much for your hard working, for your heartfelt love for this great literature of Mi'kmaq, and also for your super helpful and analytical reading of his wonderful story, The Woman with Two Navels. And thank you, Lulu. Thank you, Jocelyn. I read your paper on Cave and Shadows that's published in KK, and also for Vince, who introduced me to this notion of the Baroque aesthetics in Joaquin. And I think you agree with me that this majestic representation of old Manila in the midst of the ruins, that he wrote about right after World War II, when the novel came out, truly is one of the must necessary reading of 20th century literature. When we think of 20th century English literature reading written in English language. So I thank you, our colleagues from Ateneo, for Raymond, for Professor Serrano, Professor Reyes, Professor Martin, and everyone who is present this afternoon for this wonderful discussion of truly one of the most important critical English language writers of our time. So I thank you for your support, and I thank you for your attention. We look forward to seeing you the next time. Frank, can you show us the
Iping,
yeah, of course, we'll go to the conference in Joga, but before that, okay, Frank, do we have the next poster? We will have our next presentation by a student of Ibu Melanie Budianta, and she is Nila Utami. Maybe many of you know her already. She actually came to Taiwan for her master. Lolo, do you know Nila is a master student of Andy?
Oh, really?
Yes, wow. So we are so well connected among the islands. Yeah, Nila came to our island and got her master under the supervision of Dr. Andy Wang, who gave the talk last time. Yeah, but Nila now is working on her PhD in history at British Columbia, University of British Columbia. And she is our featured student, a PhD student from UBC. And she will be talking about Promodia and of course, this earth of mankind. So with that, we look forward to seeing you again. And thank you so much for your time and attention. And Suzanne, we will, of course, all go to Joga, okay? No problem. And Vince, yes, go ahead.
No, I was just
oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I didn't see that. Okay.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. That was great. Thank you so much, Raymond. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you next time. Okay. Yeah. Bye.
See ya.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.